Hi everyone, I'm Leanne and today we are going to be taking a look at my reading stats for the year so far. So this 6-month halfway point in the year is always a really great time to check in on my reading. Now, obviously we are into July now, so past that halfway point in the year. Everything I'm going to talk about in this video just captures like the first 6 months of the year. You may have seen that I recently did a video talking about my 10 favorite reads of the year so far, and of course, as I always do, the mid-year freakout tag, which is of course a bit of a booktube tradition. But in this video, I'm gonna get more into the stats. But before I dive into those, I did want to talk to you guys about a bit of a project slash undertaking that I did recently. So over the years, I have recorded my reading in a few different ways. So I've typically had a spreadsheet, and then I've also used an online platform like Storygraph. I used to use Goodreads. Since Storygraph launched, I transitioned over to Storygraph. And my commitment to keeping those two things updated have kind of ebbed and flowed over the years. There have been periods where I've been really bad at updating it, and just over the years there have been discrepancies that have grown between what I've had on like the spreadsheet and what I've had on Storygraph. And I'm mainly talking about a representation of my physical library here. I think the record of, what I've read every single month and then every single year, that has been pretty up to scratch because I've done monthly wrap-ups for like 10 years. That's all pretty solid. But in terms of recording what's in my physical book collection, things have just not been up to date. So I basically almost started from scratch in terms of recording what I have in my physical library. I think having an accurate record has also been a bit of a struggle because I have two places where I have my collection. So I have the bulk of my collection here in my flat in London, but then I also have quite a lot of books at my mum's house in Ireland. And as I was going through this process of re-recording all of the books in the library, I realized that there was actually way more discrepancies than I had initially anticipated. So it ended up being quite an undertaking, but I do feel very confident that the record I've got now reflects every single book that I own. I found that there were books that I had unhauled that I still had a record of owning, and books that I had bought and there was no record of me having them in the collection. So I'm feeling very confident that everything is now up to date. So I have 992 unique books in my collection. And then on top of that, I also have 15 duplicates. So what I mean by that is, the prime example is my Alice's Adventures in Wonderland collection. I have multiple editions of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Or there are some books where I have like the novel edition, and then I also have like an illustrated version of the novel. So there's kind of like duplicates, and all of those books that have duplicates are books that I've already read. So those books aren't like adding to my TBR. But what I do want to celebrate is that now that I have this record and following my most recent book haul, I have officially transitioned into having an actual library. I have reached that magical over 1,000 book milestone. So that's very exciting, if slightly terrifying to me. So the full collection is 1,007 copies, with the bulk of my collection being here in London. So I have 383 books in Ireland, so that's 38% of my collection. And I actually thought this would be a lot less, kind of looking at, when I'm at my mom's house, looking at the books that I've got there. But actually the majority of my poetry collection is there, and they're obviously quite slim books for the most part, so they don't visually look like they take up as much space. So yeah, 38% of my book collection I don't even have with me, and of course I will rectify that one day. And taking a fuller look at my collection of books, I do think there are some books that I've got at home that I may end up unhauling the next time I'm in Dublin. So in this flat, I have 624 books. Okay, it's now time to dive in the stats for this reading year. One of the very stark things that making these stats more accurate has revealed is an official number on my physical TBR, and that is I have 261 books that I own and haven't read yet, which is just wild. Like, there was a time where a big ambitious goal of mine was to get my TBR to below 100 books, and I think I maybe did that for a month during the pandemic. I have a few videos coming up to kind of celebrate and reflect on 10 years on BookTube, and one of the things that I'm going to be doing is properly reflecting on 10 years of potentially a book buying addiction or book acquiring addiction. Like, part of the issue is that it's not just my purchasing decisions that grow my TBR. Like, I get a lot of books from gifts, I get a lot of books from work and from like other book publishers as well. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. So I'm gonna try and talk about this in almost like 3 sections. The first section is what I've been reading, the second is what I've been acquiring, and the third is kind of like random goals and intentions. So as of the end of June 2026, I have read 70 books in the year. My goal was to read at least 10 books per month. So I read 10 in January, 8 in February, 12 in March, 17 in April, 14 in May, and 9 in June. So there's a couple of months there where I haven't reached that 10 book mark, but it's been like compensated in other months, so that's fine. And then in terms of how many pages I've read, I have read 21,228 pages. So that's an average of reading 3,538 pages per month. So I'm anticipating that I'm going to read around 120 to 140 books in the year, which makes me really happy for a few reasons. I mean, firstly, just kind of tackling that physical TBR, but secondly, just reading a lot brings me joy, and I generally find that if I'm reading a lot, it probably means I'm in quite a good like mental health space. I find that my reading tends to dip down if I'm like quite stressed or I've got a lot of things going on. Obviously, the quantity of books isn't the most important thing. It is more significantly about quality, but I do see a lot of positivity for myself in reading a significant quantity of books. It generally means like things are all good with me. In terms of a breakdown of the age groups I've been reading in, because I do read a lot of adult fiction, but I also read quite a lot of children's fiction and young adult fiction, both for my job, but also for my own reading enjoyment. So 37 of the books that I've read so far this year were for adults, 16 were for young adults, and 17 were children's books. So it's a fairly even split. Adult has a little bit of an edge on the books for younger readers at 53%, but then we have young adult at 23% and children's books at 24%. A slightly more in-depth genre breakdown, although an imperfect breakdown. It looks like my most read genres are children's fiction and young adult fiction. So I've read 16 books of children's fiction and 16 books of young adult fiction. But the reason they come out a bit higher and look like my most read genre is because I don't really break them down beyond that age grouping. So I don't break it down to like young adult romance or young adult thriller, for example. Whereas adult, I break down a little bit more precisely. So I've read 2 short story collections. I've read 1 book of adult fantasy. I've read 9 adult romance books. I have read 3 poetry books for adults. I have read 3 classics. Obviously within classics, you've got different genres within there, but just in terms of how I categorize my library, like classics is its own little thing. And then 15 books I have just categorized quite generally as adult fiction because I felt like they didn't quite fit into one of those maybe more commercial or precise genres, but equally like a lot of them I don't think are, say, like literary fiction. So I think in this adult fiction category, you're going to get a little bit of lit fic, but also I guess some like book club fiction, which I think is like my favorite genre. In terms of the size of the books that I was reading, so I read 4 books that were under 100 pages, 7 books 100 to 199 pages, 20 books between 200 and 299. The biggest category was 24 books from the 300 page to 399 page mark, 14 books from 400 to 499, and then over 500 pages there's only 1 book. And that 300 to 399 mark is generally my sweet spot for books. Like, that just feels accurate to basically every single other year of my reading. In terms of when these books were published, I read 1 book from the 1600s, so that's when it was originally published, and then we have to skip forward to the 1900s before I read anything else. So I read 4 books that were published in the 1900s, 3 books between 2000 and 2010, 14 books between 2011 and 2021, so a lot of kind of backlist books there, 5 books from 2022, 9 books from 2023, The biggest group is the 19 books that I read that were published in 2024, and then 15 books that were published this year. So I have quite a good split between reading stuff that has come out more recently, but also stuff that is effectively backlist. In terms of reading series or standalone, 45% of the books that I read were just standalone, and then 25 books were in a series. So I think a lot of the books that go into the series category were probably like children's books that I was reading for work. 37 of the books that I read were by authors who were new to me, but 33 of them were from authors that I'd read before. So it was really nice to see that I am getting a mixture of being introduced to new writers, but also revisiting authors that I have read previously and enjoyed. In terms of the quality of what I was reading, I gave one book 1 star, and then I gave 11 books 2 stars. I gave 3 stars to 32 books, and then 4 stars to 22 books. And I've only given 5 books 4 stars. And if you did watch my video talking about my top 10 reads of the year, I did say that not everything that was on that list were like amazing 5 stars. Like, I loved them, but there's some sort of like secret sauce that goes into being a 5-star book for me. And honestly, like, my star ratings are kind of arbitrary. Like, there's not a particularly like exact science to it, or even an inexact science to it. There's just no science at all. And then in terms of where I got the books that I was reading, and this is going to transition us nicely into talking about my book acquiring year so far. 38 of the books that I read were books that I had bought, 19 were books that I got from work, 8 were books that I got from another publisher, and then 5 books that I've read this year were gifts. And as I said, that transitions us nicely into talking about the books that I have acquired this year. So it's 102 books. So I've been acquiring at a quicker pace than I have been reading. There's 32 more books that I have bought compared to what I have read. So that's like roughly like 2 months, if not a little bit more, worth of reading that I'm like acquiring faster than I'm reading. So in this 6 months, my TBR has grown. There are some books that I have unhauled that I hadn't yet read, but even factoring that in, my TBR has grown in this 6 months. So to be even making a dent in reducing my physical TBR, I really do need to have a few months off from acquiring stuff. I will have a book haul coming up at like either the end of the month or the start of August. And I think between then and Christmas, with the exception of stuff that I've got to read for work, I really need to chill. 61 books were books that I purchased. So if we're looking at the books that I've purchased, I am reading at a fairly similar level to what I'm acquiring. So I got 14 books from a chain bookshop, I got 10 books from an indie bookshop, and then 37 books I got secondhand. That is insane. And then in terms of other ways books have come onto my shelves, I got 15 of the books that I hauled from work, 17 from other publishers, and then I had 9 books that were gifts. So 41 of the books that I have acquired, I didn't purchase. Okay, now moving on to talk about some of the more random like goals and intentions I had, because we can have a whole video where we talk about like my book buying. So one of my reading intentions was, with the exception of my classics collection, because I kind of exist in like a different part of my brain, any authors on my shelves where I had more than 2 unread books from them on my shelves. There are 2 offenders for this. I say offenders as if they're the problem and not me. But we have Paul Rick Kenny. I'm definitely going to read at least one of his books, probably 2 of his books around spooky season, so I feel kind of okay about that. And then Marion Keyes. So I have 4 unread Marion Keyes books on my shelves. I don't feel so bad about that one because I definitely will read like her entire body of work at some point, but I think certainly like reading 1, maybe 2 before the end of the year would be good to kind of get that goal up to speed. On top of that, there are 10 authors that I have 2 unread books from, so I shouldn't be getting any more of their books until I've read at least 1 of the ones I've already got on my shelves. And I would like to do that, so get them down to 1 book each, so that I do have the option of getting another one of their books if I would like to. I think, yeah, maybe I do want to like amend this intention to no more than 1. I feel like maybe the 2 just gives me a bit too much leeway. Reading 10 books per month, we've already spoken about. Using my TBR jar every month, I have been doing that to varying degrees of success. I've had quite a few successful months in a row now where I have read all of the books that I've picked out. But earlier in the year, it was a little bit patchy, but nonetheless, I'm really enjoying the process of picking out the prompts every month. It just makes me look at my shelves in a slightly different way. So I'm going to carry on doing that. At the start of the year, I said that I wanted to read all of my pre-orders in the month that they arrived. And then at the quarterly point in the year, I realized that didn't quite make sense. Like, especially if a book came out at like the end of the month. And I did just want to add a little bit of time beyond, like, say, a 4 weeks, like a month from pub date. So I decided I wanted it to be 6 weeks. And you may have seen in my most recent haul that I had a lot of pre-orders come in at a similar time. So I think that's going to be quite a focus in like the next month or so of reading. I wanted to read all of my remaining proofs. So there are a few proofs on my shelves from books that have already published. I think there's still a couple that I've got unread. So let's try and rectify that in the next quarter. I wanted to be really on top of my work reading this year. And I think I've probably done that with like, and this is a very inaccurate percentage, it's just kind of a percentage based on vibes. I think I've probably done that about 80%. I think I need to do a bit of an audit on what I've still got to read from my work reading. I wanted to film a bookshelf tour. I haven't done that. I wanted to make 3 reading vlogs. I haven't made any, but I've got ideas. And one other thing that I wanted to do was make sure I kept going to book events that weren't related to my job. So I made this a goal a couple of years ago and it brought me so much joy. I think for a while I avoided like book or literary events because I was like, well, I spend a lot of time at these things for work. I kind of want to free up my evenings for like other stuff. But it actually had such a positive impact on me going to literary events that weren't related to work, and I've kind of just kept it as a goal every year to make sure I continue to do it. But this year has actually been one of the best. I've been to so many fantastic events at bookshops and heard so many amazing authors speak about their work, so that has been really brilliant. And a goal that I have every year is to host the Irish Readathon, and Aoife and I did that again this year, and I read so many fantastic books for it. So that is everything that I'm going to talk about today in relation to my reading stats for the year. It will be interesting to see how these compare at the end of the year as opposed to this like halfway point. I know these like stats videos aren't for everyone. They can be a little bit boring for some people, but I imagine if you're still here, you are like me and you find the data quite interesting. So if you want to let me know you're here and you don't have anything in particular to say, why don't you leave me like a graph emoji, since we are both data nerds. That's it for me. I hope you're well, and I'll speak to you in my next video.